course, that musical intro, Darius. We got to kick this off the right way.
Hello, Brian.
Hey, what are you doing here, John?
I've decided to do today's show in nature, so I'm in sunny Palo Alto.
Oh man, I will be there next week. I'm excited to take a look at how Silicon Valley has changed over the months, if at all.
It seems quieter and sleepier, although we both know that it's what goes on backstage that's really the key, right? Behind closed doors.
Absolutely. Well, we're in exciting times here in the United States, to say the least. Definitely very, very gripping times. So let's have a smile on our show today, and let's look at where we are with the future. Welcome, everybody. This is Intersections. Let's just jump right in. So Intersections is a weekly conversational jam session that dives deep into the intersections of technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. Every week, we feature some of the brightest, most interesting, most visionary minds across all of those fronts. And it is the highlight of my week, spending time with John, Leslie, Gregarious, and our guests. So why don't we just introduce John, and then we'll bring on our first guest. So John is a thought leader, entrepreneur, advisor, a great friend, the co-host of Intersections. He's a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage. He wrote the best-selling book, Jamming, the Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. He chairs the Institute for Large-Scale Innovation. Let's see, I think, The Economist called him Mr. Creativity. Hey, John, welcome to Intersections.
Hey, Brian. Great to be here. Great to be jamming with you, to use one of my favorite terms of art, and especially because for all the eclecticism in my background, my nonlinear career, we have almost a mirroring effect. You know, Brian has been named one of the most significant thought leaders of the age in terms of digital transformation and innovation. In my view, he's been there right at the inception of kind of linking the whole digital domain to the whole notion of marketing and communication and community building. And we share the multimedia reality of putting our thoughts out in internet format, books, videos, keynote speeches, advisory engagements. He is the global innovation evangelist for Salesforce. So hello, Brian.
Hello, John. Well, I got to tell you, though, that maybe this is an idea. When I'm back in the Valley, we can do a show outside and eventually getting into your new studio as well. All right. Well, since we're a little bit behind schedule, let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to introduce our first guest, Mihir Shukla. He's the CEO of Automation Anywhere. I had the opportunity to share the virtual stage with Mihir recently, and it's incredible what he's up to. So he's the CEO of Automation Anywhere. It's a digital workforce platform that's committed to making work more human by automating business processes and liberating people. He drives the company strategy and execution, has an incredible passion for innovation, which is one of the reasons why he's on. And as a visionary in the automation space, he's been able to define a new category of the market with over 3 billion size in the market. So with that, Mihir, welcome to Intersections. How are you, my friend?
Good, thank you. Thanks, Brian and John, for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We had a little link snafu coming into this, but before we jump in, maybe you can take a moment to kind of share with us the company's vision, some of your work, and especially kind of how things have changed in these times of pandemic disruption.
Happy to. As you already mentioned, I'm Mihir Shukla, CEO and chairman of Automation Anywhere. Automation Anywhere is an enterprise software company. We are a very recognized leader in the space of RPA and AI. RPA stands for Robotic Process Automation. It is an entirely different approach to automation that is truly a game changer. And in the next foreseeable future, it holds the promise to be able to automate everything that can be automated in our businesses. So that's a brief introduction about automation anyway. You asked about the pandemic. If anything, Brian, the pandemic has accelerated this journey. I think many of our customers were caught unprepared. I think instinctively customers knew they had to change, that they have to become more digital enterprise and have more automation and more digital transformation in place. But they thought they had 3 to 5 years to do that, or maybe more. And come pandemic, within few weeks, they realized the sense of urgency. And I have the pleasure of talking to nearly 4,000 of my customers.
Wow.
And virtually every leader is now pulling their digital transformation 3 to 5 years early. I think pandemic has made everybody aware that they need to operate in a more digital operating.
I mean, that's pretty dramatic disruption. I mean, that accelerating digital transformation roadmaps by that many years in a matter of weeks and months is pretty incredible. In fact, it gets me to think now that if companies were looking that far on the horizon now, how does the future of digital transformation change, and what's the role that you see automation playing sort of in the next, as we kind of come to the tail end of COVID, hopefully sooner than later, but actually post-COVID as well?
I think a few things have become more clearer during the COVID crisis. One is that the automation, the intelligent automation, which includes RPA and AI, is a key foundation for any digital transformation. You cannot achieve a true digital transformation without an intelligent automation platform. So I think that has been made more clear. The second part that has completely changed in the last few months is the adoption of cloud. Brian and John, as you can imagine, in our business, we have been talking about cloud for last many years, 10 at least years. And customers were adopting at a slower pace. And come pandemic, within 6 weeks, we completely see a shift of customers' mindset. What they realized was, for the longest time, on-premise was safer. I can control things, it's mine, I can manage it. Within few weeks, when thousands of employees had to work remotely, they realized that things that were in cloud scaled much better. They operated more seamlessly. The businesses were more resilient with things in cloud. So we saw about 600% increase in our business we have both the offerings on-premise and cloud.
Wow.
We saw a significant 600% increase in our cloud adoption. So I think in the future, because of the accelerated by pandemic, the future of automation, intelligent automation, is in cloud, without a doubt. There are always customers who will stay on-premise. It is designed with the AI in mind. AI is embedded in every part of automation. And the new paradigm of automation is all about democratization, putting the power of automation in hands of thousands, even millions of people, as opposed to just with few select developers or IT. How can you give this power to every user, every employee in the organization, and have a bottom-up transformation of the business?
That's a really good point, John. I'll turn it over to you. I want to get one more question out there, and before I get this question out there, I want to remind everybody to kind of share with us where you are tuning in from today. Also, make sure to share your questions with us in the comment section. It's a pleasure to have you with us every week, so thank you so much. So, before coming in, Mihir, to pandemic disruption, I remember seeing a lot of stats and giving a lot of presentations on the future of automation, and most executives, and by most, it was a significant, like higher than 75% of executives, didn't really have a plan or a vision or even a grasp of how automation was going to help transform their organizations. But with the incredible disruption that you're sharing and the incredible adoption that you're sharing, what is it that you think, though, that executives still need to get moving forward?
I think they need to realize that the new form of automation is dramatically different than anything they have experienced before. because once you are able to put it in hands of millions of people, it is a true transformation. We've been using the word digital transformation, but in hands of thousands of people, it's a true transformation. And they need to realize this form of automation can go across any department in your organization and across virtually any vertical industry. If you look at automation anywhere today, we have over 10,000 use cases across HR, finance, supply chain, sales, marketing, and it is virtually spread across all the different verticals, right? So healthcare, finance, insurance, telco, just to name a few. They need to realize this new sets of technologies now have come together. A culminated of technologies have reached a point where almost an equivalent of a mobile revolution that we saw in our personal life is now coming to our work life, where these new technologies will transform how we work. I'll give an example, Brian and John. We recently introduced a product called Ari. It is a digital assistant for work. We all have digital assistants for our home life, whether it's Alexa or Google Home or Siri. We don't have one for work. Why not? We spend so much time at work. This new product that we introduced is a digital assistant for every employee in an organization. Imagine what it will do to work. Every single employee with a digital assistant. Not only it will transform the experience of every employee at work, an unprecedented productivity for an organization. So these are some of the things to keep in mind for leaders, that they need to think about this new wave of automation very, very differently. It's the consumerization of enterprise software, if you will.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I don't want to hog the whole conversation, so I'm going to save a couple of my questions if we have time. But I definitely want to pass the baton over to John, and then John also seeing if you saw this question pop up as well. This is really interesting, so maybe we can get to this one towards the end of the conversation. So, John, over to you. Oh, John, your sound. You might be on mute.
There's airplanes flying overhead in Palo Alto. I guess they're skywriting, so I wanted to just spare the audience from that noise. I was fascinated by this notion of the consumerization of enterprise, and I wanted to explore that further, because if you talk about democratizing automation, there's been some discussion of late of creating personal operating systems, operating systems that can handle a variety of relatively automatable tasks, if I can put it that way. So what are some, first of all, what are some examples that you see of the consumerization of enterprise that go beyond, let's say, a digital assistant in every worker's pocket? I mean, are there things that can affect our daily lives as well? And then to turn the question inside out, if we are talking about democratization, how accessible will the tool set required to put automation everywhere be, so that we don't have to rely on people who went to MIT and have 3 master's degrees to actually do the implementation?
Right. That's an excellent question. I think the examples, as I mentioned, there are across every job function virtually. So if you are an employee in a call center, you know what you have to do from one call to the next. Now the call center agents are able to use these digital bots and digital assistant to assist them while they are engaging with customers. If you are in a finance, you process tons of invoices. Your assistant, your bot will process these invoices for you. If you are in an HR, you have in order to onboard an employee, you have to make add employee to hundreds of different systems. Your bots will do that. In supply chain, in healthcare, I can go on. In mortgage applications, your bot can process a mortgage application within few seconds as opposed to 15 days. So across, pick any industry, any part of the work that can be automated with an AI, embedded AI, your bot will automatically do that within few seconds as opposed to days. So those are the few examples.
So what's then the secret sauce? I mean, I understand the notion that we take AI, we create algorithmic intelligence, we drop it into some, routinizable or routine function, and we have magic. But in the context of your company, you obviously must have some magic beans and secret sauce to make that automation everywhere vision come alive in a proprietary way.
We do. I think what we learned was the secret sauce was combining the power of AI with the robotic process automation. And one of the foundation of robotic process automation is it simulates as if it's a human being. So it can operate any application. It can open up a browser, type in a username, password, and operate an application. It appears as if it's a human being operating, but the technology is operating it. That approach is completely different than the old approach of APIs or different technical approaches. What this new approach did was it made it accessible to anybody. If you can operate an application, if you can operate a computer, you can use RPA tools. And the next biggest stage of the growth came when it became cloud enabled. So the moment we introduced our cloud native platform last year, and we're the only one today to offer that, within 4 minutes, anybody in the world can get started on this platform, automate, create a bot within few minutes. Imagine the pace. Before you can even spell the word automation, you are onboarded.
It's kind of pulling humans into the exponential development dynamics of AI, right? I mean, and it's kind of an interesting conversation between the two. Mindful of time, let me pass it back over to Brian, because I know you've got a couple of things you want to get on the table before we move on. Brian, are you on mute? There we go.
How about that?
Excellent.
How about that? The most fascinating thing about today has been the link not working and my Bluetooth not wanting to actually allow me to control the cursor. But there we go. So as we talk about the future of technology and we get a grip of how to use muting on our platform, because automation is introducing so many new opportunities. And because also you're also interjecting intelligence into the process, but also making it approachable by everybody. How do you see that relationship between employee and machine? And also, what role should educators play and also business executives play in sort of the skilling and reskilling of employees for the future workforce?
I think it's an excellent question. I think the future, without a doubt, is an augmented workforce where human and bots, or we call them digital workforce, they are working side by side, each doing what they do best and with human in charge, right? And it allows people to achieve new heights of productivity, creativity, efficiency when we are augmented with a bot. Without a doubt, that's the future. I think the importance of reskilling our workforce is extremely important. I think we have reached a point in this technology evolution where in our lifetime, very near future, we are going to see a very meaningful impact happening to how we work. So I cannot stress enough the importance of reskilling for this generation. And I think the responsibility is obviously on educational institutes and government, but I think every business must own that. One of the things we are particularly proud about is we trained about 1.1 million people on our platform in over 100 countries, and these are these are nano degrees. So anybody within few days can acquire the skills and be immediately effective. Imagine if every company in Fortune 500 trained 1 million people on new skills. We will be ready for the new world, right? So it is extremely important, and it is essential that everybody engages.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I look forward to following your work. I know that I've been meaning to spend some time with Ari, diving deeper and to share some of my insights around that experience. But it's really a great pleasure to have you on the show, Mihir, and we hope to have you back as we I mean things are just changing so quickly and new opportunities are opening up. So thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck. You guys are on an incredible run.
Absolutely fascinating.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Wow, John, the one thing about Automation Anywhere is I ever since I started working with the company, some of the stories that are coming out in terms of rapid transformation. There was a bank, there was an airline that had to, as you could imagine, process refunds that were just through the roof because of flight cancellations and people not actually wanting to fly. And RPA actually did the job of hundreds of people that would have taken years to process in a matter of days. And so it's just really incredible. And also to hear the good news and the positivity around how we can help people reskill, relearn to get in front of automation and AI instead of the dreaded fear of machines taking jobs, but instead helping people and empowering people to take more creative and more innovative roles, I think is promising, and it's probably a topic we'll want to spend more time on.
Well, and also just the question that I didn't ask, which I wanted to ask, was whether he had some thoughts about how automation everywhere would actually augment innovation capacity on a societal scale. And I think it begs the whole question of technology enablement as we get into this era of accelerated innovation, innovation really moving along at the speed of Moore's Law.
Yeah, we're at the speed of the pandemic. What might be faster?
One step ahead.
John, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our next guest.
Well, it's a great pleasure to introduce Seth Cohen. Seth and I actually met fairly recently, and it was because we're both writing for Forbes, and unlike me, Seth has the ability to catch the wave of social media and to make his ideas go viral in a way that is both enviable and also an example to be learned from. But then when we started to talk, and inevitably, we found interesting areas of common interest. And one thing is, Seth, who has a background in law, who's been doing a lot of public interest work, whose work I would dare say is trending more and more in the social good domain, has been an entrepreneur in starting Applied Optimism, which is, in a sense, bringing the power of optimism to us at a time where in many cases there's not a whole lot to be optimistic about. So, Seth, welcome. It's great to have you. You definitely fit our crystal slipper of being a pioneer dancing on the edge of something really important. And I guess we should start just by asking you to explain a little bit what is Applied Optimism, both the concept, but also the venture or the enterprise that you're leading now.
Sure thing, and thanks for having me, guys. It's John. It's always good to see you. And Brian, I feel like that talk show guy. It says long time listener, first time caller. So I've learned and followed your work since my days when I was working at the Schusterman Foundation, and my friend James Andrews told me to pay attention to the work you're doing. So,
James.
Yeah. So look, I mean, it's 2020. The idea that someone's going to have a business, much less a notion of optimism, seems either crazy or just downright foolish. But the truth is, you can be optimistic and you can be realistic at the same time. And as John, you mentioned, I started my career in law and learned the power of tools through law, debate, negotiation, of how to create change. While I was working in philanthropy, I learned what money can do to ignite change. But what it really all comes down to is the competency of an individual to see the future, to be able to really understand and harness the future. So through my work, I've really zeroed in on this core competency of applied optimism. It's not to wake up in the morning and just think the world is the best possible place. That's what optimism is. It's hard to say that. Yesterday, over 1,600 Americans died from the pandemic. We're losing sight of that, obviously, in the context of this week. This morning, over 750,000 people were reported as having their first-time unemployment claims. These are real numbers, and these are real reasons that one can look and be pessimistic. But at the same time, if you step back and say, what can I do to harness my own sense of purpose, my own sense of harnessing and leveraging knowledge, and then really engaging in the wonder of what that does, that's applied optimism. It's the blend of purpose, knowledge, and wonder. And ultimately, a group of people that can harness their own sense of purpose, knowledge, and wonder together form a community. A community forms change. Change sometimes goes in one direction or another direction. But I think at the end of the day, if you can really harness the applied optimism of people, you get to a better place. And you can get to a better place in your own lives, in your organizations, in your community, in your country, in the world. And that's in a nutshell what applied optimism is. And that's what our team does.
So I guess one thing that comes to mind is the challenge of making optimism and a positive outlook compelling and dare I say it, even on trend, when social psychology tells us, and actually you just have to look at the cable TV, that bad news and pessimism and complaining and to say nothing of conspiracy theories are what command more attention. That somehow a story that's a happy story about something that's good is going to be far less engaging than one that's about how Joe Biden is both a communist and a Martian and a kleptomaniac. Right.
That's right.
So how do we overcome that?
Look, I think you're hitting on something really important, right? Which is we tend to emulate and replicate what we see. So if you're seeing certain trends or you're seeing certain negativity, then that's what you're going to replicate. And we all know that person that works in our organization that is kind of the downer. The sky's always falling. Nothing's good. And that person can become a catalyst in a lot of ways for negativity. If on the flip side, you create the tools and the competencies for the catalyst of positivity, of optimism, it becomes replicable. And that's the role of a leader, ultimately, John. The role of a leader inside an organization or inside a community is to set the culture, is to set the pattern language that others are going to follow. You have a choice as a leader to be an optimistic and, to apply your optimism through purpose, knowledge, and wonder. Or you can be someone who is not only doom scrolling, but doom saying. And oftentimes doom scrolling turns into doom saying, and we have to break that cycle, right? You have to break that in a meaningful way. And it's not easy because obviously the stories that sometimes get sold, and, John, you and I have talked about this with our work at Forbes, the idea clickbait of sometimes of a negative story is going to gather a lot more eyeballs than a story that's, passing on praise and platitudes for the good that's being done. But we have to break that pattern, and we have to create new patterns of optimism.
It reminds me of that movie that came out quite some time ago about paying things forward. And, I guess that the challenge and opportunity for you being in the optimism business, so to speak, is, how do you actually create that autocatalytic dynamic where setting a culture of optimism, supporting optimistic attitudes that lead to optimistic behaviors, trigger other people to do the same, and it becomes like popcorn, as opposed to, I got sort of socially minded for 10 minutes and had a brief burst of optimism and inspired one other person, and the spark doesn't. I mean, how do you get the spark to turn into a prairie fire is, I guess.
Yeah, well, look, sometimes it's language. I mean, and sometimes it's really technical change. So, I'm doing a lot of work with some foundations and some larger organizations right now that are scenario planning. Nobody wakes up in the morning and gets excited about scenario planning. I mean, that just like, I want to go back to bed, right? Like, we're scenario planning today. So I lead exercises right now with a bunch of clients about futurescaping, right? We all landscape a little bit, or some of us, I guess, either like have people help us landscape, but we don't spend enough time futurescaping. What does the future look like for us? And how are we going to envision it in being pragmatic and being realistic, but really seeing our way through it? And look, the pandemic is a great example. we're in a moment, people keep talking about the new normal. I don't say there's a new normal. There's a now normal. It's a now normal today. There's a now normal tomorrow. There's a now normal next week. And what we have to figure out is how we're going to navigate the multiverse of futures, right? That we have to engage and embrace it with kind of possibility, not fear. And so I think, a lot of the work, frankly, John, and you have to break this down in the organization, Brian, is like you have to stop the kind of fear that you can't be resilient or you can't navigate your future state. You have to actually build those competencies up. And part of that is just really truthfully changing the language, changing the tools, and then ultimately changing the tune that people, share together.
Well, it's interesting. The social psychologists have done a lot of studies that show that the ability of a leader to create a positive context in turn shapes the behavior of people in a positive direction, and that the experience of fear is actually biological energy. So when you're anxious or afraid, it's the classic fight or flight syndrome, and you can use that energy to run and hide under the biggest bed you can find, or you can use it to stand up to the bear that's charging at you. And so how you contextualize that it makes all the difference in the world. But the problem is that we've got leaders that are creating different contexts. I mean, we see that in the political realm right now, with, on the one hand, an appeal to our better natures and courage and the possibility of a great future. And on the other hand, this kind of dystopian view of, everybody's out to get everybody else. And, we just have, it's the kind of the survival of the fittest.
Yeah. So, well, that's why it can't just be about leaders either. While I pointed to leaders, it also has to be about institutions. And I'd suggest to both of the two of you and to your followers a great book called A Time to Build by Yuval Levin. Yuval has written a book this year. In fact, I cited it as one of my 8 books that every leader should read in Forbes, because what he talks about is that we need to create those pattern languages at institutions. It's become very passé to be related to or connected to an institution, the church, the government, like the old institutions that our parents and grandparents may have been involved in. But when you start to inject these kind of skills and competencies into institutions, those institutions then help shape and frame the leaders. Right now we have, leaders that shape the institutions, which by nature they will, but we've broken the pattern of institutions helping shape the kind of the norms, the values, and the orientation of leaders. And so I think that's what Yuval talks a lot about in his book, and I'd recommend anyone to read it.
Well, it sounds like what's needed is an ethical framework in the literal sense of a set of values that everyone can align around, because that in turn shapes institutional culture, which I agree, has a lot more heft than an individual leader here or there. But that also points to a dilemma of the age, doesn't it? That we don't have like the canon of values that we can pull off the shelf and say we can all agree, because apparently we don't.
Well, you've got to get it in. You've got to get it in the bite size, or what I oftentimes call the snackable form, right? In TikTok, I have 3 teenage children, and we often talk about the shrinking attention span that you have to kind of get something delivered. And you have to figure out how some of these patterns of optimism, of possibility, get bite-sized, because they're not going to listen to the 10-minute speech or the hour-long. They're not going to listen to the Frederick Douglass oration of why a war is meaningful. They're only going to get it in a minute. And so we use a lot of things like formulas. I mean, one time when I first switched to being a nonprofit professional in the foundation world, one of my former law clients told me that you didn't need to be an Einstein to be in the nonprofit world, which I found, of course, deeply offensive, not only to me, but to all of the nonprofit professionals. And it stuck with me. And I said, well, I don't know if I'm going to become the Einstein of the nonprofit world, but I'm going to make my own formula. And you know what? He was Einstein, so it's going to be E equals MC squared, because why not? I was a lawyer, not a mathematician, scientist. And what I talk about is engagement, E, equals motivation multiplied by competency and capacity. And when you break that formula down, someone comes to you, and Brian, I know from your work, you can appreciate this. Someone comes and says, how do I engage more people? How do I, kind of enlist a following? You say, it's E equals MC squared. You want engagement, figure out what the motivation is, figure out what the competency of the talent you're seeking is, think about their capacity, financial, intellectual, social, and solve for the formula. And leaders will say, you know what, maybe it isn't that hard to be optimistic. It's a formula. So you have to use clever tools to cut through and really capture the attention in the bite-sized, snackable way that it's offered.
Hey, Brian, over to you. I know you've got, I can tell from your expression, you've got thoughts.
I'm loving this conversation. Seth, thank you for the kind words, and allow me to return some to you. I am really a big fan of what you're doing. Right before the show started, Gregarious, who's our producer, and I were talking about an incredible Atlantic article today that said, no matter how much optimism we have about the future of our own country's leadership, a significant portion of our population voted for a sociopath. And that's I'm a hopeless optimist. Yeah. And so I want to see that now that we can see I want to actually believe that now that we can see where we are as a country or as a workforce, or as friends and family, whatever it is, there is clearly a divide that exists in our world, not just in the United States. And then we have, as you called out, doom scrolling earlier, but essentially, if we take anything away from the social dilemma that we saw from Netflix earlier this year, there is just an incredible sensation, an incredible motivation to be negative. And to dive into this dark side that seems to be gripping people. So I just wanted to, it's a big question, so I'll try to break it up into like little parts. But how do we bring people to the middle?
Yeah, I'm delighted you're asking this question.
Yeah. Let's just start there. How do we bring people to the middle?
Look, I mean, I think you're talking about the George Packer article. I don't know if that's the article you're mentioning, but the George Packer has an article in the Atlantic today that talks about facing the bitter truth.
Yes, yes.
And you have to. I saw that article, and and I encourage people to read it because again, you have to be a realist to be an optimist. You cannot be in denial to be an optimist, an applied optimist. And I'm glad you also asked because we're actually going to be launching in the next few weeks a project specifically around this question. Look, the public square is broken. And this is what we need to kind of face as the facts. We used to, the nation was never the good old days. And I certainly don't subscribe to that because the people were not enfranchised. They didn't have the ability to vote. I mean, I think they are projecting turnout to be over 65% in this election, which will make it the highest turnout since the 1900 election, the election of 1900, which was even higher. But of course, women were not allowed to vote in that election. So, and it was before the Civil Rights Act. So on one hand, we have in this election an amazing civic turnout, but we're probably not going to sustain it. Not unless we do something dramatic and different. We can't wait to have a national conversation every 2 years in the high velocity, hand-to-hand combat of a political election. We need to figure out how to rebuild that public square and have those conversations. And as you know, Brian, better than lots of people, the ability for technology to help us do that. And the ability for technology, especially now that we're learning how to use Zoom and all of these streaming services in different ways, ability for us to have more conversations with one another, to learn a better pattern of dialogue, an adult version of civics, right? Because most of us don't learn civics as adults. We learn civics as kids. And then the world teaches us that everything we learned about civics as kids is actually completely different because it's all about, money and power and all. So I think we need to, one, re-engage and re-educate Americans about what civics look like. And it's not just voting. We need to figure out how to build a better public square. And as I say to my team all the time, we need to reinvest in an optimistic America. And that's our new project is going to be Optimistic America. How we bring those conversations into the public square because, guys, philanthropy is not going to be able to pay for it. Government's not going to be trusted to do it. The marketers are not going to prioritize selling it. The businesses aren't going to necessarily invest in creating it unless they can figure out how to monetize it. Americans and people all around the world are going to have to rebuild the public square. We're going to have to give them the tools to do it.
I'm beginning to tune into the idea that we've got an opportunity to hear about that new initiative in more detail, but maybe marry it with invites to a couple of people who are deeply into the technological creation of community, and see where that goes.
And I do think that's where, we're at a dangerous moment. If I do have one thing I'm watching out of the corner of my eyes is there's a lot of negativity right now, obviously, around social media platforms, particularly in the run up to the election. Trust is low. We have kind of Facebook lawsuit, Google lawsuits. I mean, there's going to be in some ways a reckoning for how we engage and even possibly regulate some of these platforms. But we can't let that dampen the opportunity that technology provides us to foster a more interactive, a more engaging public square. We can't let the past too dangerously dampen the possibility of the future.
Yeah, wow.
So much to follow up on.
Oh man, Seth. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and for your work. And I, as an optimist, I do want to do more. And I do think that there's a lot of listening that has to happen. Obviously, someone's going to have to take the first step. And I think once we can really understand, maybe apply a little empathy as well.
Yeah, that's the key word, empathy.
Maybe we can help. Maybe we can all help one another move forward from this. Well, Seth, thank you so much for joining us.
And gentlemen, I really appreciate it, and I'll look forward to seeing your optimism in action.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you, Seth. Gosh, I have goosebumps right now. John, so I'll turn it over to you because we have a limited amount of time left, and we started late, and I know Steven's backstage, so maybe you can give him a proper introduction.
Okay, so Steve Ezell is a collaborator of longstanding, and he is currently the Vice President for Innovation Policy at the IT Innovation Foundation in Washington, D.C. And ITIF, if you don't know it out there, is a really important organization that does extremely high quality work around technology policy, around innovation policy, and the kind of underpinnings of the global system that enable innovation and technological progress to occur. So Stephen has been involved in these topics for a long time, with a background in policy and a background in the, kind of migrating more and more to the public good end of things. And I can't think of a better person to have on the show, given our focus on the frontiers of innovation. So welcome, Stephen.
John, thank you so much for having me on, and Brian as well. I appreciate it.
So, maybe one place to start is just to get you to talk a little bit about how you see ITIF, or I guess you guys would say ITIF, what ITIF's point of view is on innovation, with particular reference to some of the most recent work, because there's a phenomenal new report on looking at the Biden versus Trump approaches to innovation. We just had a conference on the global trade system and how it had relevance to the flows of not just goods, but of ideas and innovation. And, you've looked at AI in terms of the race between the US and China. So help us understand a little bit more about ITIF's perspective and its point of view on innovation. And then maybe we can dive into some of these specific topics.
Our perspective generally, I think, at ITIF is to advocate for public policies that drive innovation-based economic growth in the United States and our states and in countries around the world. Work in a wide variety of technology verticals, from advanced manufacturing to biotechnology to clean energy. And I think our broadest perspective would be that innovation is the outcome of intentional human action, and it needs to be effectively supported by robust ecosystems if it's to flourish at a national or state or company level. The U.S. certainly is a nation that has the world's greatest set of innovation strengths, whether we're thinking about universities or national laboratories or federal programs, or the amount of money we invest in R&D, the quality of our workforce, the level of risk capital, the innovation willingness of our companies. So there are a lot of strengths here in the U.S. Our point of view at ITF, though, however, is that perhaps there are ways with more effective coordination, public-private partnerships, federal-state relationships, for example, that we can get even more out of the potential that is latent in our innovation economy.
Do you see the world becoming more integrated as a global innovation system, or do you see it maybe becoming even more fragmented? Are we seeing a centripetal or a centrifugal dynamic these days? Because, it seems like, and I know Rob Atkinson, who's the president of ITIF, has coined this really evocative phrase of innovation mercantilism to describe some of the strategies of countries that, take IP and don't pay for it, and or countries that actually steal IP and, build on decades of basic science research without having to go through all of that. I mean, overall, do you see, and this relates to the optimism versus pessimism discussion we just had as well. Do you see us moving more in the direction of, innovation, cooperation, and collaboration, or do you see that centripetal force kind of spinning us to be more separate, which is very important, in the era of pandemic, in the era of climate change, in the area of national security, with all the disruptive military technologies that are now on the table? I mean, how do you see that, and how does ITIF see that?
Well, I think certainly over the past 5 years or so, the centripetal force has gotten stronger. Unfortunately, at a time where we do need greater levels of global cooperation. But whether you see it in a rise of populist governments across the world, from the United States to China to India, you see Make It in India plans, you see China 2025 strategy. Even in Europe, they talk about digital sovereignty. In Europe, they are very interested in building up European digital tech champions that can take on US and European firms. And then, of course, we have the US China tech war or conflict, whatever you want to call it. And it would be fair, in my opinion, to say that both sides are the instigators of that. If you look at some of China's policies, Made in China 2025, this is where they called out 10 kind of advanced tech industries for leadership. In semiconductors, for instance, it says quite clearly, they want to, quote, have their imports of US semiconductors by 2025 and eliminate them entirely by 2030. So the Chinese plan is, in fact, import substitution, industrialization, and build up Chinese tech champions. And the US response to that, we've seen what the Trump administration is pushing back on, kind of other things like Huawei and TikTok, et cetera. But I think it's fair to say that, both sides have engaged in that path, towards decoupling. And so then the challenge for policymakers globally, I think, is going to be to reset the conversation around trade and globalization in a positive way, to say, look, if we really adhere to the WTO tenets, right, of private enterprise-led, market-based, rules-governed trade, we need to reaffirm the potential of that framework to maximize, global welfare for the world's citizens. So that we ensure that there are jobs in Youngstown, Ohio, as much as we ensure there are jobs in India and Europe and wherever else in these advanced technology industries. So, yeah, I think you very clearly have those two sets of forces, as you said, the integrative and the centripetal force unfolding at the same time. I think it'll be very interesting to see how the Biden administration looks at examining some of these challenges. But even here, you see an administration that appears to be coming in where they're going to call for, $400 billion of Buy American procurement. Buy American will be a central part of the Biden strategy, and that, to your point, is a populist approach, right? Not the global integrationist approach necessarily.
So if we took a fresh piece of paper out, a blank sheet of paper, and said, the world needs some degree of innovation, stewardship, and policy that maybe has some teeth in it, that, the major issues that affect us are global issues. They're not American issues or, Indian or Chinese issues. They're human issues. And yet there's no real place where that conversation takes place in a practical way, nor is there a place where the policy discussion happens. I mean, I remember running a meeting some years ago where the central question was, what would you do if you were the chief innovation officer of the world? And it was a very interesting conversation where the take-home realization was, well, we wish we had something like that because we don't have it. I mean, we don't have. So if you could wave, or let's say if ITIF could wave a magic wand and do some serious redesigning of the global innovation system with particular reference to stewardship and policy formulation and trying to create win-win situations, what might that look like? Because I think if we simply rely on legacy institutions and legacy thinking, it's going to get us incrementally further, but it's not going to really change the game.
Well, I hope the administration that comes in, whether it is Biden now or if Trump pulls it out, does recommit to a focus on effective international institutions. Right, we've seen the U.S. pull out of the World Health Organization, for instance. Obviously, the Trump administration has really placed limits on what the WTO can do. So I think a first step would be re-engagement in these types of international institutions to make them work effectively for all of global society. One other idea that ITIF has put on the table relates to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for instance. We've called for creation of a global science and innovation foundation, where you'd ask each nation to contribute 0.1% of their GDP or some share of their level of national R&D investment, specifically towards working to solve commonly shared global challenges, whether pandemic, right, or climate change. But it would certainly be interesting to have nations commit a pot of money to work on those types of problems. I think another thing that the U.S. should do with Europe is say we're gonna commit to solve this problem that exists somewhere else in the world, whether it's to cure a form of disease that exists only in Africa, for instance. But the more we can do to collaborate and explicitly solve problems for others, that would go a long way towards recommitting ourselves to the potential and the ability of science and technology to produce positive outcomes for the world's citizens.
Well, and also it would be a culture of generosity, a culture of relating again to the optimism discussion that we had a moment ago. Mercantilism means that what's good for me is good for me, and what's good for you has to be good for me in order to be good for you. And I don't think we have the time, given global grand challenges, to really remain stuck in those attitudes if we want to see some effective global responses. So, Brian, I can tell by your expression that you've got thoughts that you want to put on the table. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'm fascinated by this conversation, and Steve, also in your work. There's so many places where I could start. Let's see. So what's a good one? All right. So you mentioned science, and we live in a world where technology is ironically convincing people that science doesn't matter the way that it used to, and I wonder if the ITIF goals become, or part of it, in order to truly innovate, become literacy. And I'll kind of expand on that question a little bit, in that anytime we see, for example, Congress or Senate interview some of our tech leaders and question them about some of their goals or their visions or their investments, or if we look at some parts of the United States alone that are just so completely unplugged or disconnected from even where the future is and where it's going, how do we bring literacy to people that are setting policy, that are steering countries forward, so that we're all kind of on the same page of what innovation means and what it can give us back?
I think there are several answers to that. There has to be a commonly shared understanding that science and technology generates positive long-term outcomes for society. There's got to be an intergenerational compact that understands that as well, so that the benefits are shared across time and space. as you may recall, some years back, about 4 years ago, we went through the sequester in Washington, D.C. This was where we were, putting caps on federal spending of all types, including for federal investment in R&D. Actually, was in the office of a U.S. Congress member, and I was saying, hey, we have to continue to invest in scientific research. So, this is the seed corn for the future. And this U.S. Congress member looks at me and he says, "But Steve, isn't innovation the problem? Isn't innovation why we had the Great Recession? Why we're losing all these jobs, technology, and automation? Right? We've lost that compact." In both regards, one, the belief that technology over the long term will be good for jobs and occupations, but also this notion that it's responsibility of the generation today to invest in science that produces occupations and jobs and technologies that employ people 30 to 40 years from now. The same investments that our forebears made that we're now benefiting from today. So I think in public discourse, restoring that positive narrative is going to be very important. Of course, going along with that is the recognition that technology is extremely disruptive. They call it skill-biased technological change when one loses their employment to technology. And the best countries in the world, Germany, Austria, Sweden, invest 12 times more as a share of GDP than we do in the United States at what are called active labor market retraining programs, or worker reskilling, worker retraining programs. And again, that's how you manage that transition. But in the U.S., where our federal investment in worker retraining as a share of GDP is down 30% over the past 2 decades, right? So relative to our own historical past and to what our peers do, we're not making those types of investments. And those things will be critical if we're going to effectively help society to navigate these shifts and do so in a way where we don't lose the belief in the potential, right? Because what we have seen happen politically, in my opinion, over the past several years in this nation is those who have said, hey, we're gonna put some of the brakes on this because we don't like what's happening in places like the industrial Rust Belt, where we've lost the ability to participate in these in the benefits of these technologies. And you see that obviously in rising income inequality in the US and the fact, if you look at a study we did 2 years ago, and you look at innovation jobs in the US, like these are jobs that are either in high-tech industries or jobs that require a certain skill level or educational level. Fully 1/2 of innovation jobs in the United States are concentrated in only 41 US counties. So we need to broaden access, I guess, is my response to your question.
Wow. I think we have maybe just a minute left. Steve, climate change is something that I think, whether you believe in it or not, is a very real thing to consider in terms of how we solve for it. And this question just came up that I thought was really interesting. How can global innovation come together to solve climate change as an overall global metric? And most importantly, show simple progress and success for everyone. Any advice there?
A couple of responses. One, ITIF has a report where we rank countries' contributions to achieving a clean energy society, or to clean energy innovation. And what that report does is look at both the positive things countries are doing to try and solve the problem, like investing in R&D, and other negative things they're doing. Arguably, in some cases, if you look at China's production of solar panels, they now do lead the world there, but some of their solar manufacturing processes are actually have a negative environmental effect because they're not very environmentally clean. So this looks at all the positive and negative sides of the ledger and comes up with a ranking of which countries are genuinely contributing best to solving the global energy challenge. That would be one response. Another, I think, this is an issue where there's a lot of talk and sometimes not as much action as needs to be the case. So having a clear understanding of the dynamics, right, of both to what extent you're, as nations, investing in these advanced technologies. So there's investment and there's adoption and deployment, right? And those are separate parts of the equation. So if we're thinking about, what measure gets managed, we're looking at these very facets of the clean energy innovation system, right? All the way from the front end of the initial research to the commercialization of the technologies and their deployment at scale. And if there's a place where the United States has fallen down over time, and we've written extensively about this, we actually have a group called the Center for Clean Energy Innovation at ITIF. But one of the problems in the US has been scale. We've invented a lot of promising technologies. But if you look even, for instance, at the number of electric vehicle charging stations in the United States, one element of the Biden $2 trillion clean energy or green energy infrastructure plan, was to solve that problem right there. So he would call for at least the development of 500 charging stations in the U.S. within the first year of his administration. So thinking along those metrics or the facets of how we truly deploy these technologies that do exist at scale would be something we would call upon policymakers to focus on.
So I think you can see from what Steve is saying that the amount of knowledge, and it's not just this mountain of books that behind it, which is an impressive sight, I must say, but and those are real books, not a Zoom background, but so, I would highly recommend that anyone who had any glimmer of interest whatsoever in this, I think, fascinating conversation, go to ITIF's website and look at their publications, because we've just touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the value that's been created by them and by Steve and his colleagues there. So thank you so much for being with us, Steve, and hopefully
thank you, Steve.
Continue this.
John, Brian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, and look forward to continuing to carry on the conversation and work with you both on trying to solve many of these commonly shared global challenges. They're not going to go away anytime soon.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Wow, John, one of the things that we didn't get to, I think we're going to have to dedicate an hour to each guest that I really wanted to explore was, the United States needs to make investments in infrastructure, as so many other innovative countries do, and part of that is education. And I just don't think that we're teaching our kids how to be ready for the future. And as a result, thank goodness that we have people like Mihir from Automation Anywhere who are investing in training 1 million people to reskill them for a future workforce. But we've got so much work to do. That conversation was just incredible. I've got so many ideas and things that I want to work on.
That's the whole idea. Let's have our minds blown on a weekly basis.
What a great show as usual, John. It's a pleasure to see you. And I'll catch up with you. I'll catch up with you afterwards. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us for yet another incredible episode. Please make sure to join our newsletter. Please follow us on social media. Please reach out with your questions, your ideas, recommendations for future guests. In the meantime, please be part of the future that you want to see. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Stay safe. Stay safe.